Hi, I'm Ann Radelfs, and welcome to Inner Gardening with Ann the Grower. An important part of soul gardening is working with the masculine and feminine sides of ourselves. American culture tends to psychically sever the wholeness of our boys and girls, teaching them to attack or shun what contrasts their physical gender. And a lot of people never get over this. Beth Wickman, my guest today, and I will be discussing the repercussions of this. Beth is a wife, mother, community volunteer, corporate veteran, life coach, speaker, blogger, and soon to be author. She's on my show today to help us unleash the value of our gender genius. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here today.
And tell us more about you.
Well, I am among the first generation to be raised with the idea that men and women are equal. And so it never occurred to me that any of my life experiences had anything to do with my gender. And I went through my education and my corporate career and never made that connection. But it wasn't until I became a life coach and started working with clients and looking at things from other perspectives that I started to realize that, hey, gender really is still used as a high order qualifier in making everyday decisions, both on a personal basis and in the corporate world. And so I started exploring that and researching that and came to the conclusion that, there really are a lot of cultural myths that we adhere to this day that limit us as human beings.
Yes. Can you give us an example of one of those cultural myths?
Well, the big overarching cultural myth is about the value of female versus the value of male. So human life is made of 4 different components: the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. But 90% of all human characteristics are common between men and women. But about 5,000 years ago, culture decided to divvy things up and say that only certain characteristics were labeled as female, and this other set of characteristics are labeled as male. And so they decided that the physical and mental aspects of life are male or masculine, and the spiritual and emotional aspects of life are female or feminine. And then on top of that, they set up a value hierarchy that said that anything male or masculine is superior to or more valuable than anything female or feminine. And so we've spent the last 5,000 years trying to get people to conform to these little boxes that say that only women can be this and only men can be that. And so we still see this thinking today. It's so ingrained and so subtle, we don't know that it's there. But here's an example. When we want to insult somebody, we say that you hit or run or throw like a
girl.
That's right. And isn't it interesting that nobody's ever insulted when we say you throw like a boy? So there's this ingrained belief system that keeps this value hierarchy in place that boys are superior to girls. And this infiltrates every area of society.
Yes. I've heard of authors, for example, using a male name because they'll get more attention, more people will buy their book.
Exactly. J.K. Rowling, her name is Joanna, and she has no middle initial, but her publisher said, you know what, 11-year-old boys won't read from a female author. And so she had to come up with a pen name that was gender neutral.
Yeah.
Why is it that we can't celebrate the ideas and the capabilities of women in culture? We're still suppressing that and keeping that down because it's still considered not as good.
Yes. And as you know, my field is trauma, post-traumatic stress. And I hear post-traumatic stress in this because growing up, so many people, that part of them is shunned, and they go on to spend their lives shunning it or attacking it wherever they see it, because that's what was done to them, recreating their trauma.
Right. Yeah. And so we spend our whole lives trying to keep ourselves in this little box, but at the same time fighting against it. And we don't have the role models or the tools or the permission or the freedom to actually tap into all of our characteristics. That's why I talk about gender genius, because we all have genius in us, but we limit that genius by saying, oh, only women can be this and only men can be that. And so our genius really, it emerges when we give ourselves permission to express all of our human characteristics. But as a culture, we still don't allow ourselves to do that.
What do you think is holding us back culturally?
It's simply the belief. The belief is passed from generation to generation. We're seeing evidence now that not only do those beliefs come from life experience, but they're also passed as genetic information from generation to generation. And so it's simply this high order belief that anything male or masculine is superior to anything female or feminine. And so we see that expressed in culture all the time. So for example, we women, you and I, we laugh because when we speak our idea, nobody hears us, right? But when a man speaks our idea 2 minutes later, he gets a Nobel Prize. It's not that we don't have good ideas, and it's not that nobody hears us. It's not that we're not audible. It's that we're socialized from birth to discount anything coming from a female or feminine source. And so half of the ideas that we have available to us are just automatically dismissed unless we perceive that they have some masculine credibility behind them.
Well, I've noticed in my field that so often the feeling that something isn't right comes to the woman. And it turns out that, yes, their children are being abused some way. And there's no concrete evidence at first. It's just a feeling inside the woman. And a man can so easily say, oh, honey, everything's fine, and talk her out of it. When that feeling is real, it needs to be investigated and find out what isn't right.
Exactly. And not only are we dismissing our feelings and our intuition in women, but we're also dismissing it in men. The whole idea of equality and the feminist movement and all that, it's not just about women, it's about men too, because these limitations are harming everyone. And so men, we don't like men who express emotions. The only valid emotion we allow them to express is anger in the form of violence. And so we're seeing more and more men expressing their anger in the form of violence because that's the only thing our culture gives them permission to do. And so this belief system is harming men just as much as it's harming women.
I agree. I see it as basically making men and women hop on one foot. If they're only allowed to be masculine or women are only allowed to be feminine, they're losing half of themselves, and they're going around hopping on one foot, and they're very easy to knock over because they don't have this stance of both sides of themselves, that strength.
Right, right. And so we see men who are not able to tap into their creative genius. And so they struggle. We see women who are not willing or able to tap into their intellectual genius. In the workplace right now, there's this big argument about whether or not women are good at STEM fields.
What is that?
STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and math.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And so it's a ridiculous question because we're all capable according to our gifts and aptitudes, but there's still this argument going on that says, oh no, women can't be good at this. And so this is one of the reasons why women aren't getting opportunities in the marketplace, because of this belief system that says, no, women aren't supposed to do that. And yet there's evidence all around us that contradicts that belief. But we're not at a place yet where we're willing to set that aside and look at the evidence in front of us and say, oh yeah, women are good at STEM fields. I mean, I got an A- in calculus in the engineering school at my state university. Okay? So I don't have
well in calculus too.
Pardon me?
I did well in calculus too.
Exactly. But you know, I'm a woman and I'm blonde, so I'm not supposed to be good at that.
Wow. And so much is just opportunity. I'm remembering a man, this was after the Katrina disaster in New Orleans, and he said, I'm multitasking. I'm a man and I'm multitasking. I can't believe it. Why? Because he had a situation where he had to. He had lost his home. He was now living abroad. He now, or outside of the city of New Orleans, taking care of his wife, the kids, the family, redoing his house. Well, women are normal. This is normal for them because they're taking care of all this at home in the household, and men are usually focused on their work. But this man now his wife was urging him to do that, and he was able. He was stepping up to the plate.
Absolutely. And in terms of brain function, men have certain thinking patterns that tend to compartmentalize and focus on one thing at a time, whereas women's thinking patterns are more connected. And we see the big picture. We see all of the parts and pieces moving around together. And so it's easier for us to multitask. I agree with you on the opportunity issue, though, because people will say, oh, women aren't good at science or engineering. Well, it's because we don't have the years and decades of training that have been invested in men. And so you're not comparing apples to apples. When women have the same training as men, then they can compete equally. Same thing for men. Men are not raised to tap into their emotions and to use their ability to multitask. And so they don't develop that as a skill. We keep them limited in their box that doesn't include that feminine skill. And so they're not getting the opportunity to develop into their wholeness.
Yes, I'm remembering there was a boy who was hospitalized he had, I believe, a kidney cancer, and one of his kidneys had to be removed. And his parents were so dear with him. Honey, how do you feel about this? Let's talk about what's going on. It was so emotional. It was so intimate. Mm-hmm. I was in the room as the physician, and I never will forget it because I'd never seen parents talk to a boy in such an emotional, intimate way. It was beautiful. What if our schools were like that? What if our schools were working with boys and girls in the same way to keep them whole?
Right. But again, we still have this high order qualifier that says, you know, boys are treated this way and girls are treated this way. Think about it. When a little girl falls down and skins her knee, we hug her and kiss her and help her to feel better, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when a little boy falls down and skins his knee, what do? We tell him that boys don't cry.
Yeah.
We teach him to suck it up and be a man.
Yeah.
And so we're teaching our boys, we're very actively teaching our boys to detach from the emotional parts of themselves.
Yeah.
And so they're not able to develop those intimate relationships, and they suffer for it. In my work with domestic violence victims, some of the things I've learned is that men commit 75% of our suicides, 90% of our homicides, 99% of all domestic and sexual assaults, and pretty much 100% of mass shootings. And I've asked experts in the field, you know, why do men do this? And one of the answers we get back is because men don't have empathy towards others. And empathy is something that children learn during early childhood, right? And so we're teaching our boys to detach from their human empathy and compassion towards others. And so they're not able to interact in a deeply connected and intimate way.
I'm remembering a documentary I saw once where they were following children, I think the first 6 years of their life. Mm-hmm. And they were literally following them around with a camera. And one particular time they were with two boys, one who grew up in a single parent home, lots of trauma, and one little boy had just such a loving household. Mm-hmm. And the one who had a lot of trauma, when he was with his parent and her spoon broke, it was all deliberate. He laughed at her and sneered at her and made fun of her. Mm-hmm. The little boy, when his dad broke his spoon, they were eating ice cream, he stroked his dad's arm and just, "Oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry. Your spoon broke. I'm sorry." And then he gave him his spoon.
Oh.
It was so dear. And one of the things they said in the documentary is that boys learn this from their fathers. People think it's the mother that teaches all the emotion, but boys actually learn it from his father. His father was so dear with him, so emotional, so intimate, and he picked it up.
Well, and think about what the demographics of our society look like right now. Just about 50% of all children born in the US today are born to unwed mothers. And that number goes up to 70% in the African American community. And then even those of us who have fathers present in the home, we still don't always get that emotional connection. My father, for example, he was the traditional businessman who went to work during the day and he came home and read his paper at night, and he had just about nothing to do with his children. And so we didn't develop an emotional connection with him, even though he was present in the house, because he grew up without a father. He didn't know how.
Oh.
So he couldn't pass that along to his own children because he didn't have it to begin with. And so this isn't just a women's issue. You know, the whole Me Too movement, the sexual harassment issues, the feminist movement, the equality movement. This is not just about meeting the needs and desires of women. It's about meeting the needs and desires of all of us, because men have been cut in half too, like you say.
Yeah, psychically.
They're suffering for it just as much as women are.
Yes. And I think we should use different terminology, because the men and women terms we use is looking at their physical being. Mm-hmm. Like in the hospital, this is an 18-year-old white female who presents with some sort of disease.
Right.
What about the emotional age? What about the mental age? What about the spiritual connection? Those are all important. So I think we should stop using the word men and women to describe people who are emotionally maybe stuck in infancy, or mechanically. That's one thing I struggle with, mechanical things, when I just haven't had the training to mature in that area. So I'm very young in that area.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is we are all on our individual journey, and we all learn certain things at certain times through certain experiences. As a culture, we tend to try to get people to conform. You're this age, and so therefore you must behave in this way. Or you're male, therefore you must behave in this way, and you're female, you must behave in this way. And I think, again, that really limits us, and it places us in a state of judgment and shame. I haven't had this experience, and therefore I am somehow less than people who have had this experience. So I agree it would be healthier, more holistic if we looked at each person as a unique individual who's where they are on their journey, and rather than judging them or making them wrong for believing or thinking what they do, just giving them opportunity to expand their perspective and to learn new things at their own pace.
I'm thinking about a historic village I grew up near called Old Economy, and we would go there as children, field trip, and boys would pretend like they were living several hundred years ago and what they did, and girls were in the kitchen doing what they did several hundred years ago. And what if we had something in our schools where instead of going into the past, we went into the future and we let boys experience what it would be like to, first of all, let's stay the present first, where let boys be treated like girls be treated like boys, so they get the experience. And then let's go into the future where there's equality and everyone sees where each other's at. And, oh gosh, Beth hasn't had the experience that I have. Let me share my experience. Oh, she has experiences I haven't had. Let me receive her experiences. Wow.
Well, and I tell you, that's exactly where I'm trying to go with the whole gender genius concept, because we are moving out of the information age and into the idea economy, where ideas are becoming the currency in the marketplace. And so historically, we've taken materials or data and turned them into products and services. But now business leaders are talking about how innovation and value creation is coming from our ability to turn ideas into value. The problem we have in moving in that direction is that we still use gender as a high order qualifier. And so if we're going to dismiss all of the females, all of their ideas, and then we're going to dismiss the feminine parts of men, that leaves us with only like 25% of all possible ideas that we could be working with to move into the future. And the thing is that if we don't solve our problems here and now on Earth, wherever we go in the future, if we go to Mars, we're just going to take those same belief systems and those same problems with us. And so what would happen if we got rid of those labels, like you say, get rid of male or female or masculine or feminine, and just looked at the idea, allowed the ideas to come forth? And as we know, one idea will trigger another idea, will trigger another idea. And that's how we evolve, and that's how we improve and get better and innovate and create. But if we're still chopping off 75% of our ideas to begin with, we're never going to get there.
Can you where that 75% comes from?
I say, this is my calculation, if we're cutting off anything female or feminine, that's half the population. And then we're cutting off the feminine parts of men, which is half of men. So that makes 75% of all possible ideas that we're dismissing right off the bat, because culturally, for the past 5,000 years, we've said the only thing that's valuable is what we call masculine ideas coming from men.
Except in the home.
Say that again?
Except in the home, cooking, making recipes, you know. We have various areas where females are allowed their self-expression, but you're right, it's very controlled.
Well, but the interesting thing, I've been doing a lot of reading lately that talk about when you know, women will become masters at something. For example, brewing beer, for example, used to be a female dominant thing. But then men decided to do it, and they took over, and they said, okay, now this is a masculine thing, and only men can do it, and we get paid a whole lot more than women ever got paid for doing it. And so
yeah,
we, as a culture, we're still focused on anything that men do is valuable. So even when men are doing the same thing that women do or have done, somehow when men do it, it's more valuable. And it doesn't matter what it is. You know, when women are good at sewing, they're a seamstress and they get paid very little. But when they're a tailor or a designer, as a man, they get paid a whole lot.
Yeah.
So we're still having that that split and that value definition that masculine is good and female just isn't quite as good.
And I know there will be some viewers that think, oh, there are a lot more women in the workforce now. There are a lot more in leadership and that sort of thing. But when you hear their stories and what they went through to get where they are, it's not normal some of the time. You know what I mean? As far as they had to compromise themselves or they became masculine to get their job. Also,
right.
Who they knew and what they were willing to do.
Right. A lot of women have come to the conclusion that equality means becoming identical with men. And so they're starting to deny their feminine parts, because in order to be successful in a male-oriented world, you have to become male. And so again, we're limiting ourselves. But here's the thing, we're at a point in history where more women are graduating from college, more women are moving into middle management positions, and more women control the money. We're just about to go over 50% with women controlling the money more than men. And so this isn't just a moral imperative for men. We've been beating men over the head for years with you should treat women as equals because it's only fair. Well, yeah, that's like saying you should eat broccoli because it's good for you, but nobody likes to eat broccoli. So we need a different approach, and that approach is starting to smack us in the nose, because if men are unwilling, and even women are unwilling to acknowledge the value of the feminine parts of both men and women, then they're not going to be able to compete in the new marketplace. There was a guy, Tony Porter, who did a TED Talk back in 2010, where he was talking about the man box. And he said the liberation of men is dependent upon the liberation of women. And I say that the liberation of women depends on all of us deciding that femininity is just as valuable and important as our masculinity.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to need to close. Anything else you want to say about Gender Genius?
Oh gosh. There's so many more things to say and talk about. I am getting started writing a book where I'm going to talk about how the brain works and how the facts of how our brain works is propelling these myths and perpetuating these myths, and what we need to do to move beyond the myths and get back into a state of wholeness for us, not only as individuals, but as corporations, as governments, as communities. We need to be tapping into all of our ideas and not limiting what is valuable or not valuable, because we're not going to be able to move to the next level of innovation, value creation. We're not going to be able to go to Mars until we tap into all of our genius.
And I would add every aspect of our humanity, whether masculine or feminine. Every society defines those differently anyway, but every quality is essential for negotiating our world. And as long as we've got some part of ourselves, we have a handicap.
Exactly.
How can our listeners get a hold of you, Beth?
They can reach me at, my email is beth@gendergenius.com, or you can look me up on my website, www.gendergenius.com.
Great. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And anything else you want to say?
Just thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I look forward to having more conversations, and I think the more we have these conversations, the more we give people permission to be all of who they are and to really live up to their full human potential. And we all need that, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of the world as a whole.
Beautiful. Thank you. And all for now.
Thank you, Anne. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.